Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. I'm not quite sure how to categorise this. It's a sort of discussion video, but it's really more answering a question that I get asked a lot, which is how do you choose what books to read? How do you're browsing, you come across an author you've never heard before, you obviously read the blurb. How is that informed? How do you discover new writers? I say new, not necessarily that they're writing now contemporaneously, but actually they're more likely, in my case, to be sort of back catalogue of authors who write in the sort of themes and subjects that I'm interested in. And I'm going to talk about sort of a recent set of events by which it might illustrate part of my process, or a certain way that I choose books, not exclusively the only way. And obviously if people want to comment or discuss how they do it, that I'm throwing that open, but it's really just trying to provide a partial answer to the question of how do you choose books, how do you come across authors. So this originated when I was talking to Zena over at Beating Around the Books about the imprint Dalkey Archive, who, while they do publish some contemporary authors, their main thing is getting back into print books that have gone out of print, that they think are highly significant and need to be preserved and made available still. And as an example of that, two of my favourite authors, or three really, Ben Marcus's The Age of Wire and String, David Markson's Wittgenstein's Mistress, and Concrete Poetry, transcript by Heinrich Backer, which I didn't actually know was on Dalkey. It's only when I started putting this video together that I realised it was. Because Zena and I were talking, as I say, about Dalkey. And she went onto their website and came back to me and said, oh, these two books sound very interesting. One of which is Danielle Memoir, public reading followed by discussion, and another which hasn't arrived yet through the post. And I agreed. I thought they sounded fascinating, and obviously I've bought them. I read this last week. I haven't even reviewed it yet, but I will do. And I noticed in the back, as I'm sure in many of the Dalkey books, there is a list of other of their publications, which they say is not exclusive, as it's not all of their list. They don't have the space to do that. They give the website for you, which is obviously what Zena went on, for the full list of their publications. But I resolved that when I finished reading this, I was going to look through the authors and books and see if there was anything of interest, because I know Dalkey Archive, I trust Dalkey Archive to have some titles that are going to be of interest to me. So with that in mind, it just so happened that I had an internet outage all day last week at home. So I went through that list in the back of the book, which is about 5 pages long, and hand wrote books that sounded interesting to me, even if I've never heard of the author. So what am I going on? Well, obviously there are some authors there that I've heard of, that I've read. And usually the books that are listed in there, if I haven't already read them, are ones that are not generally available. As I say, Dalkey sort of republish books that have gone out of print. So they're books by authors I know, but I might not be aware of those books' existence because they've gone out of print, they're not listed anywhere, but Dalkey have got them. But it's really the authors who I've never heard of, and what is it? I can't buy out on the strength of their name because I don't know their name. I'm not familiar with them. I don't know their work. So there's something in the title that attracts me to them. And I have done a video in the past called, Never Buy a Book, or Never Buy a Book by its cover. And I said in that video, and I'll post the link to the video, that I would far more likely to buy a book on the strength of its title than its cover, if I knew nothing else about the book other than the cover I could see and the title. So titles are always one thing that can tip me off to, oh, this sounds interesting, then I'll read the blurb. So that's exactly what I did. I hand wrote the books that I culled from that list, and then I went online to read the blurbs of them. And I said to Zena, I thought I'd probably, out of this list of 17, I bet I end up ordering about 5. As it turned out, it was 6, but only 5 of them are from Dalkey, more of which are not. Anyway, so the first book that sounded interesting was by an author called Abdullah Wahab Medeb, who I'd not heard of, and it's called Talismano. And Talismano intrigued me, so I went online, and it turns out that Medeb is Tunisian, more of which are not. And the blurb says, a lush journey into Tunisia of memory and imagination. Talismano is a novelistic exploration of writing seen as hallucinatory journey through half-remembered, half-imagined cities, in particular the city of Tunis, both as it is now and as it once was. Walking and writing, journey and journal mirror one another to produce a calligraphic, magical work, a palimpsest of various languages and cultures, highlighting Medeb's beguiling mastery of both the Western and Islamic traditions. Medeb's journey is first and foremost a sensual one, almost decadent, where the narrator luxuriates in the Tunis of his memoirs, of his memories, and intercuts these impressions with recollections of other cities at other times, reviving the mythical figures of Arab Islamic legend that have faded from memory in a rapidly westernising North Africa. A fever dream situated on the knife edge between competing cultures. Talismano is testament to the power of language to evoke and subdue experience. So, part of that sort of resonated with me because one of my favourite books is Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. And I'm not into psychogeography, but I do like descriptions of cities where the city almost becomes sort of a character in its own right. But I'm particularly drawn to both Tunisia and Algeria. You know, you have Camus, obviously grew up in Algeria, and L'étranger, the stranger, involves the character Merceau shooting in Algeria on the beach in Algeria. You also have Georges Perec's first book, partly takes place in, I think, Carthage in Tunisia, because Perec himself had relocated there to get his first job. But more significantly, because they're obviously white colonial French authors, are these 2 books by Kamel Daoud, particularly the Merceau investigation, because this book is a response to the erased and silent Arab that was killed by Merceau in L'étranger. So it's quite an angry riposte to Camus, saying, well, these are the people that never got dealt with in your book, the family left behind. And the main character is the brother of the guy who, you know, in Camus' fictional world was shot. It's brilliant. It's very angry, but it's also very, you know, it's rich in metaphor. And then I bought this, read it a couple of years ago. If I've got a link to my review of it, I'll post it. This is fabulous as well. Daoud himself is a journalist, so he's not very prolific as an author. But, you know, as I say, I'm into literature from Tunisia and Algeria. So this Medeb is, you know, straight away into my shopping basket. So the next on the list was Micheline Marcon, Portuguese author, with the brilliant title, A Brief History of Yes. How could anyone not be attracted to that title? And when I looked it up, as I say, I found out she was Portuguese, and the blurb sort of says it's collage, very fragmentary. So it sounded like Fernando Pessoa's The Book of Disquiet, which I've yet to read, by the way, also a Portuguese author. But with Marcon's book, at the heart of this sort of collage is telling the story of a breakup between a man and a woman, which I have to say is less enticing to me. And what I thought was, I'm going to eventually get round to reading Pessoa, and if I like that collage style, then I'll come back and maybe investigate the Marcon. Then the next one was an impossible name to pronounce. It's from Ireland. Alf Machorchalainin, and apologies if I've butchered that. And it's called The Corpus in the Library. Again, brilliant title, you know. I'm into books, I'm also into reading about death. The Corpus in the Library covers both, with that pun on corpus. The problem was, as I read the blurb, that it's 2 novellas and 7 short stories, and I'm really not into reading short stories right now. Maybe one day I'll come back and pick it up, but that sort of got disqualified from my initial selection because, as I say, it's short stories. The next one is an Israeli author, Yoram Kaniuk, and it's called Life on Sandpaper. Again, it's that title that draws me to it. Life on Sandpaper. Brilliant. So this is what the blurb said. Actually, it's not the blurb, because I think on Amazon there is no blurb, or it's a 2-line blurb that tells you nothing. This is a review. I picked up the book and it blew my mind. It is written in short, matter-of-fact sentences that move between people and places very quickly, and often contain non sequiturs or thoughts that are not followed up in the conventional fashion. Its anti-literal form of storytelling is so refreshing. That's what grabbed my attention. He never tells you the punchline or the outcome in many details, and you are left to think and wonder about all of it, and make up your own mind what it means. For the reader who likes to be gloriously befuddled, it is also by turns hilarious and harrowing. It deals a lot with the conditions of the less fortunate, mainly Jews and African Americans. It also contains a lot of the author's experiences with historical figures in music and jazz, Charlie Parker, Billie Holiday, William de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, etc. I'm not sure whether this is fiction or non-fiction. I don't know, and it hasn't arrived yet. But as I say, its approach to storytelling and sort of frustrating, easy resolutions and catharsis, it reminded me a bit of one of my favourite books, Our Tragic Universe by Scarlett Thomas. It doesn't sound like it in style, but both seem to want to offer other traditions of storytelling or approaches to storytelling other than the Western one, based on Aristotle's Poetics and beginnings, meals and ends, and tying everything up with a bow and stuff. So, as I say, that may turn out to be non-fiction. I don't know. And so that's number 2 that I've ordered. Paul Emond, The Dance of the Sham. So the blurb on this sort of says it's in conversation with Tristram Shandy and Don Quixote, neither of which have I read. So I just felt that I probably need to be aware and cognizant of them before reading this book, and sort of life's too short because they're both massive tomes. I can't imagine I'll ever read Don Quixote. I may get round to reading Tristram Shandy. After all, it's the first alternative or anti-novel in literature. So that kind of ruled out The Dance of the Sham, just because I thought a lot of it would just, go over my head because I didn't have the familiarity and the references with the 2 texts it was addressing. The next is Gert Jonker, The Distant Sound. Now, I'm familiar with Gert Jonker, and indeed 2 of his books are already here, Geometric Regional Novel and The System of Vienna, both of which I love, very quirky. So I ordered The Distant Sound. I haven't obviously read it yet. So that didn't take much persuasion. I'm not going to read the blurb. So that was a case of an author I'd heard of. I've never heard of the book, though. Jonker's quite hard to track down. Now, the next one is an interesting case. Bridget Brophy, The Prancing Novelist. So The Prancing Novelist drew my attention. Great title. And when I read the blurb, it said it's a passionate argument in favour of fiction, of literature, based on the novelist Ronald Furbank, who I've never heard of or never read. So again, as with the one sort of communing with Tristram Shandy and Don Quixote, I felt, well, I probably need to be familiar with Ronald Furbank to get the most out of this. But it does sound interesting that it's a passionate defence of literature and of fiction. I didn't know if it was fiction or non-fiction. I think it's fiction, but, I don't know. But I went to see what else Bridget Brophy had written, because the name was vaguely familiar. I've never read any of her stuff. She was writing mainly in the 60s and 70s, I think. And I read what's available. I mean, she did write a lot of non-fiction and I think stage plays as well. So, but I'm only interested in her fiction. And her books all sound very different from each other. Very different. So I was only prepared to sort of sample one as an example of her work, as an introduction to her work, and then maybe I would certainly buy some of the others, but also then I might come back to The Prancing Novelist. Anyway, so what I did is I bought In Transit, which is called A Transsexual Adventure, which I'm currently reading. This is my current read. It's not published by Dalkey. It's published by Penguin. I think it was published in 1969. I'm loving it. It's fantastic. It's very postmodern, but as I say, I think this doesn't represent her style, because her style, you know, she could turn her hand to any style of fiction writing. So I think this is one of her later works, and quite sort of standalone. It probably doesn't represent her, the body of the rest of the work, which doesn't matter. I'm sold on this author. I'm going to definitely buy another one. She was ahead of her time in sort of her sort of political beliefs of. She was pro-homosexual rights, she was pro-animal rights, she was a humanist, she believed in egalitarianism in a way that actually means something, unlike the lip service that we pay to it currently. So, yeah, I'm dead impressed. Definitely going to pick up more of her stuff. Okay, so the next one is by René Belletto, a French author, called Dying. Now, there wasn't much on this, blurb-wise. A metaphysical thriller about the lengths to which men will go to escape the inevitable, be it love or death. Now, that doesn't sell me on it one way or another, but the impression I got was it is a sort of a meditation on death, which, as you know, is something that goes right to the top of my interest list. My next novel is about that. So, unfortunately, it hasn't arrived yet. It is the book I most want to read of the 6 that I've bought. Although I suppose I've already started reading this, so it's not at the top of the list. So I'm intrigued by that, and I looked at some of his other books, which also sound quite interesting, but one's called Coda, so again you've got the death is part of it. Another seems to be sort of confessions of a serial killer or a psychopath. So he does seem to be sort of, his genre seems to be literary psychological thriller, which is kind of not necessarily my wheelhouse. But, you know, I want to see what Dying is like. Then I want to track down Coda. And then I might go on to that other one. Next one was Boris A. Novak, The Master of Insomnia. Well, insomnia is something that bedevils my life. I've recently had cognitive behavioural therapy treatment for it. I may make a video on that, I may not, I don't know. I'm only part way through the whole process, which is supposed to be 6 months long. So that title grabbed me, but unfortunately, I say unfortunately, it's poems. Now, I read a lot of poetry. I read at least 12 works of poetry a year. I like to do one a month. But I'm late to the day with poetry, so I'm very much feeling my way in, and there's lots of names I feel I have to, particularly from the 60s, that I feel I have to get to first rather than add another one to my TBR. So at some point I may come back to the Masters of Insomnia, just see what it's all about. Also, you find with poetry that if the name of the collection ties you in, very often a lot of the poems have nothing to do with the themes suggested by the poetry. And this didn't give me the indication that all this is about insomnia. So Boris A. Novak I may come back to, but it's not sort of pressing, urgent need. The next one, Boris Pahor, Necropolis. Again, Necropolis, you know, City of the Dead. What's that all about? Well, I went on to read the blurb, and it's a Holocaust narrative, which I'm not really casting about to be in the mood for. Although it had an interesting take, because although he was a prisoner, he was also a medic. So he has a very different take to, you know, a lot of Holocaust first-person reportage, because he was involved in treating people within the camps. Next is Natalie Sarraute, The Planetarium. So I've read 2 previous books by Sarraute. Neither of them are on Dalkey, I don't think. One is Tropisms. The other is, I can't remember what it was called. Like them both. They're very small books, you know, and they're about language and dialogue, not within books, but how people converse with each other. They're really interesting. This looks much more substantial, The Planetarium. This looks like a sort of proper novel, so I'm looking forward to that. And the next author is Gilbert Sorrentino. So the book that was listed was called Steelwork. I'd read Sorrentino's Mulligan Stew, which is a sort of trumpeted example of 1960s postmodernism. And it's fun, but it's a bit, you know, it dabbles in lots of different genres within the book, including epistolary novels and things like that. but I just found it a bit empty, a bit soulless. So I was in no rush to get back to Sorrentino. But Steelwork sounded really interesting to me as a title. There's lots of music, like Stahlversion, which is Steel Version by Einstürzen die Neubauten. Test Department, who literally played their, their rhythms on sort of steel girders and things like that. So Steelwork sort of resonated in my head. Now, Steelwork itself, the book, when I looked up the blurb, didn't sound that interesting. It was about a sort of New York neighbourhood, 50s maybe. So unlike the Tunisian one, which is about geography, this didn't really set off any sort of sparks within me. But I read what El Sorrentino had written, and I've ordered another one. I'm not sure if it's on Dalkey. Let me have a look on that list. Oh yes, it's called Imaginative Qualities of Actual Things, which I think is going to be about sort of phenomenology, which is what my latest novel, The Death of the Author in Triplicate, is about. So that sounded right in my wheelhouse. I've ordered it, it hasn't turned up yet. And on to the last four. Lars Svenden, A Philosophy of Evil. Well, that turned out to be a book on philosophy. Not a novel, so that ruled it out straight away. Not that I'm against reading philosophy, but I look at Dalkey for the fiction. Nicanor Teratologian, Assisted Living. Again, not much blurb, and the reviews were terrible. They were sort of saying this guy wants to be a sort of postmodern up with the greats, but he falls well short. So yeah, that didn't recommend itself to me. And then I wrote down Dubravka Ugresic, who recently died. She was of Yugoslav origin, but during the Civil War there relocated to Holland. And it's Lend Me Your Character. I don't know why I wrote it down, because I've read it. I'd forgotten that I'd read it. Now, as you will see, I've now dedicated a little area to my Dalkey Archive collection. But there are a couple of issues. One is I have several Ugresic books, and if I put Lend Me Your Character there, then it's going to be astray from where her books are, and kind of it makes sense to have an author's books together. Same thing for Georgy Gospodinov, Natural Novel, his first novel, guy who just won the Booker International, or at least joint first. So that sits with his other two novels, including Time Shelter, which won the prize, because I don't want it separated from his other books. So not all of my Dalkey Archive books are there. I also have to say that there are Dalkey Archive books I've read and haven't liked, including The Third Policeman and Toulouse. There's also The Recognitions by William Gellis, which I love, but it's massive, and if I put that in there, there'd be no room for any other books. So there are some Dalkey stuff that are in the shed, either because I really like them, as I say, they're too whimsical novels, or they're too big, so all my outsides books are also in the shed, because I just don't have the room in the study. But, you know, I found it quite fun that I've now got a little Dalkey Archive section. As you can see, there's a bit more room to go. I've got 3 or 4 more books coming, which will fit in there. It meant I had to move my David Markson, so he's now showing with Percival Everett, and also my Ben Marcus. So although The Age of Wire and String is there, what I was saying about not splitting our authors' books up, his others are just here. So I think we can allow that. And on to the final book that I wrote down. So this is Lydie Salvira. She's Spanish, and it's called The Power of Flies. What a great title that is. I just thought it was fabulous. Turns out this is a book similar to what I was discussing for René Belletto. This is a murderer in conversation in absentia with all the people in his life. So they're not around him, he's in jail, I assume, and he's sort of having conversations. So again, I wasn't, ever since Crime and Punishment, do we need lots of stories about the inside of murderers' psyches? I don't know. But her other book, and the book that she's more famous for, and I now can't remember its title, but it is the one that's published on Dalkey, So I should be able to find it here. Yeah, it's called The Company... oh no, maybe it's not here. I'm not sure if it's The Company of Ghosts or not. Anyway, it's a Civil War narrative from a young girl as the Civil War in the 1930s breaks out, and how that transforms society. Not the fact that, you know, Franco won and you know, it became a sort of dictatorial state, but just how the war itself, which we don't realise just quite how bloody it was on both sides. How, you know, a little girl observing this. It sounds really interesting. I have a feeling actually it's not on Dalkey. Not that would rule it out for me buying it. But I'm in no rush to buy it, I guess. I've read lots of narratives about the Spanish Civil War. But, you know, it's put her name in the frame that, you know, she sounds someone I might like. I'm just not going to get round to her immediately. So there you have it. I don't know if you find that A, interesting, or B, if it sort of helped give you an idea. As I say, this, you know, I don't only work off the title of books, but if I'm browsing in a bookshop, a title is likely to draw me in first to have a look at the blurb of the book more than anything else, if it's an author I've not heard of. So it's not an insignificant factor, but it's not the only factor. So, as I say, of those 16 books that I wrote down, I struck out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I struck out 10 of 17. One of those I'd already read the book, just forgotten I'd read the book, stupidly. 3 of them I'd read previous books by them, which is Jonker, Sorot and Sorrentino. But I wasn't aware of these books. As I say, particularly Sorot and Jonker, their books seem to be quite hard to get hold of, because obviously they're in translation, one from German, one from French, and I assume that they go out of print quite quickly. So they sort of, that list acquainted me with the writers that I'd like. Well, not Sorrentino. We'll see what this book of his is like, because as I say, I wasn't wowed by Mulligan's Stew. But it has introduced me to new writer Reni Belletto, Abdul Wahab Medeb and Yoram Keniuk, and it sort of made me do more work to find out about Bridget Brophy, that even though she's not got a title that I bought on Dalkey, I'm definitely becoming a fan of hers. So there you have it. I hope that was of interest. Till next time, thanks very much.